Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules on October 31, 2024. Before we get started, we'll go around the room and introduce ourselves, starting with the council.
Good morning, Damian Leonard, Office of Legislative Counsel.
Good morning, Senator David Weeks, representing Rutland County.
Good morning, Mark Higley, representing Orleans Lamoille District.
Bombards, a representative representing Benton 4.
Mark McDonald, Senator representing Orange County.
Trevor Squirrel representing Jericho and Underhill, and on Zoom we have.
Good morning, Chris Spray, representing the Addison Senate District.
Senator Lyons was going to be joining us this morning on Zoom, but apparently she could not do that, so we're not expecting her. And we have an individual that's missing that we haven't accounted for, but we'll get started. Actually, let me introduce.
Oh, Mike Ferrant, Committee Assistant and Director of Operations.
Okay. He's filling in for Charlie.
Charlie, yeah.
Okay, great. All right, first item on the agenda are the minutes from September 19, 2024.
Move adoption.
We have a motion. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. Okay, the first rule up this morning is Rule 24P29, Office of the State Treasurer, Vermont Saves Program Rule. This is a new program, I believe, and Rebecca Wasserman, Director of Economic Empowerment, Office of the State Treasurer. Welcome.
Becky Wasserman, Director of Economic Empowerment, Office of the State Treasurer. I almost feel like I want to say different titles since I was used to being here in a different capacity, but thank you for having me today. I'm here to talk about the Vermont Saves Program Rule, which is 24P29. This is a new rule that establishes the requirements for the operation of the Vermont Saves Program. The Vermont Saves Program was established by the legislature in 2023. It creates a state auto IRA program that requires that every employer in the state with 5 or more employees that does not offer a workplace retirement plan must enroll their employees into this, into the auto IRA program, which creates a Roth IRA account for their employees. So the rule includes definitions related to the operation of the program, as well as the process for that employer registration and a process for an exemption if you're not required to register as an employer. It also includes the requirements for the payroll deductions and withholdings of your employees for sending their contributions into the account. The rule also has the requirements for account holders and opening and closing of the account, as well as setting forth the requirements for the contribution rates and investment options. When drafting the rule, we worked with a number of stakeholders, which include the Vermont Saves Advisory Board, which is an advisory board the Treasurer's Office created to help provide feedback on the operation of the program. We also worked with Bestwell, which is the private company that is the program administrator and record keeper for Vermont Saves, as well as AARP. We also worked with the Partnership for Dignified Retirement, which is a multi-state consortium that we entered into in June. That's led by the state of Colorado. It includes the states of Maine and Delaware, and all of the states are working together to implement their auto IRA programs. So we submitted the proposed rule to the Secretary of State on July 12th, and we had a public hearing on August 20th. We did receive 3 comments before our public comment deadline on the August 27th, and we have included those comments and our responses to them in the packet. We also received some questions and potential edits from Legislative Council on October 24th. We submitted an updated rule to reflect the changes that we incorporated from those questions and potential edits, as well as where we didn't make any changes. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any members? I just have a quick question. We made an initial appropriation of $750,000 to stand up the program. And from this point forward, fees are supposed to, could you speak to those fees and
Sure. So we launched the pilot of the program in October to 7 businesses, and the full program launch will be in December in about a month. So as of now, we have not started. We will just start seeing fees coming in from those 7 businesses in the pilot program, probably around mid-November. But the fee structure we set up is a hybrid structure where there's a dollar fee and then an annualized asset-based fee. So the dollar fee that we have is $26 per account per year. $22 goes to the program administrator for administrating the program, and $4 goes to the state for our operational costs. And then there's also 0.32 on average annualized asset-based fee that is for the underlying investments.
okay, thank you.
Just a
7 weeks.
curiosity question. So I think you had at least 3 sets of feedback from American Benefits Council, NAPEO, and Messina.
Mhm.
I'm just wondering if you think that your final rules reflect some of their concerns and how you reacted to those 3 feedbacks.
Yes, I think we tried to incorporate as much as possible from that feedback. I think one of the consistent comments we got was just clarifying that for employers that are not required to register with the program, that they sort of are not contacted by us to the extent possible that we know that they're not eligible or covered under the program. So we did try to clarify in the rules that we would go use every source of publicly available information to make sure that we are not contacting businesses and telling them that they need to register if we don't think that they actually need to register. So we did incorporate that by kind of clarifying that in the rules. Another comment we got was that our definitions of relating to employee leasing companies didn't match up with what was in state statute. So we did make those changes to reflect the statutory definitions that Vermont uses for what we call client companies and employer leasing companies.
Can you remind us if companies are required to register and participate, or
Sure. So you're only required to register if you are an employer with 5 or more employees and you do not already offer a qualified retirement plan. And so we have data from the Department of Labor that we're going to use to kind of go through the list using what's called a Form 5500 to determine if a business has filed a filing that indicates whether or not they offer such a plan. And so we will only be contacting companies that don't have that filing and that we can see that they have 5 or more employees. And we will give them, we will send like 3 different notices to them before during the registration period to let them know that we think that they're required to register. If we're wrong, there is a pretty simple, you just go into the portal and check, I'm exempt, and it's a pretty simple process to exempt yourself if you do have a plan or if you have less than 5 employees. Sometimes employee numbers change throughout the year, so we might, it might change from the data that we have, which is as of last year.
Yeah. And are they penalized if they don't register?
We do have penalties in the law that say that if you see, if it's prior to October 1st of 2025, we are allowed to have a penalty of $10 per employee. And then it slowly increases. For the following year, we can impose a $20 fine, and then the maximum fine is $75 per employee. Our goal is that we hope that we won't have to impose those penalties. We're doing a lot of outreach right now, and we're going to work with employers to try to make sure that, you know, there's no fines imposed if possible.
Representative Higley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I remember correctly, I thought there was an opt-out period of time for the employee. And what is that? Is that in the rules as well?
Yes, so the program is completely voluntary for employees. So you can opt in or opt out at any time. The way it works is once your employer onboards you, when they register and they give the list of your information, there's this like 30-day decision period you have to either you'll get a notification that says your employer has enrolled you in this program. You can either opt out completely. You can use the default contribution and investment options that we've set up for the program, or you can choose to customize your options. So initially you have that 30-day period to make that decision. So you can opt out in that 30 days and just have, you know, you might decide now is not the time that I can start taking money on my paycheck to start saving. But you can also opt in at any time in the future if you decide to opt out at that time.
Thank you.
Louise?
Thanks, sir. Is there a requirement that the employer participate in some type of matching with a 401?
It's a Roth IRA, and there's actually, the employer actually cannot make any matching, any contributions.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Senator Bray?
thank you. Can you just review, Ms. Wasserman, if there are any impacts on government? So in the, you know, it could be state government, could be municipalities, could be other municipal entities like communication union district, et cetera. Or is it entirely limited to the private sector?
So if you are, it's a private sector, it's for private sector employees who don't have access to our workplace retirement plan. So if you're a government employee that has access to a plan, you're not eligible under the definition of employee.
Okay.
Or the employer or the government is not an employer under the law.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? For a motion?
Mr. Chair?
Senator Bray?
Well, I was going to move approval of Rule 24P29, Office of the State Treasurer, Vermont Saves Program Rule.
With proposed modifications submitted by the Office of the Treasurer in a memorandum dated October 28, 2024.
Yes, sir. Thank you for that.
Any more discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'll be back. Okay, next up, Rule 24P27, Agency of Ag, Food and Market, Technical Service Providers Certification Rule. We have a number of folks here, but Laura, are you taking the lead on this? I'll let you introduce yourself.
I'm Laura DePietro with the Agency of Agriculture, and I'm the Director of the Water Quality Division at the agency.
Good morning, everyone. Steve Collier, I'm General Counsel of the agency. Good to be here.
And online, just for reference, we have two staff that have supported both of these rules. Mr. Collier and I will be here for both rules. And online, we have Nina Gage, who is the Assistant Director of the Water Quality Division. and Nate Sands, who's the chief of all of the inspection team and the regulatory group that we have.
Welcome. All yours.
All right. Well, so this first role is the BMP role. Is that correct? Sorry, I don't have the agenda in front of me. Yeah. The other way, TSP first.
Yeah, we're doing,
Yeah, TSP first. Okay, we'll start with TSP. Sorry about that. So the TSP is what we call it. It's an acronym, obviously, for Technical Service Provider. And in Vermont, there are folks who are hired by farmers to do a lot of paperwork for what they need to comply with the regulations. This paperwork typically involves a nutrient management plan, which is the plan that addresses all of the land application of any manure or other nutrient sources on the farm. It also covers transfers that might happen between farms. And then additionally, these folks, another common practice they do is manage the paperwork for applying for permits. So farms are regulated under medium and large farm permits. And to do that, there's a lot of technical paperwork that needs to be submitted to the state to demonstrate that the farm has the capacity for the nutrients coming from the animals and also the waste storage to make sure that they contain all of that waste. So these folks have been around ever since I've worked here, which is 20 years at this point, doing this service. We've worked with them for all of these years. But currently, the construct is that if there is an issue with any of this paperwork and documentation, the farmer is who we currently have to hold liable. But this offers an opportunity where the person who's really doing this work and crunching the numbers and doing the math behind the scenes can be liable for doing that inappropriately if they did. I will say, I think we have a pretty good group of folks and we don't have, a lot of issues. But we've also put a lot of work into it over the last decade to really make sure people understand what the regulations are and what they need to do. But this creates that professional liability program. One other thing I will just add is what it does is it piggybacks on an existing professional liability program. So USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS is the acronym for that. They certify all of these folks on a national level because they support funding nutrient management plans for farmers in the state, in all states. And so in order to pay a farm for someone writing them a plan, they need to make sure that that person is certified by them. However, that just covers their regulations, not, any of the state regulations that might exist in Vermont. So this is why this layers on top of that. And so we've said you need to do their program, plus you need to make sure that you do all these educational 8 hours of service within 5 years to make sure that you understand our programs that we need to implement in the state of Vermont. That's the summary.
how many TSPs are there in Vermont right now?
There's not that many because we're not that big of a state, but our outreach, we reached out to 10 of them and they're the 10 that are most active. I don't have it in my fingers. There's a longer list of people who are certified by the USDA, but they're not all active, right? So we work with the ones who are truly active in doing this service and currently there's 10.
Of the medium and large farms, what percentage actually are took advantage or avail themselves of TSPs? Or they all?
I think they all do at this point. The large farms pretty much always have, and the medium farms, there were some that tried, because you can, in the state of Vermont, you can write a nutrient management plan as a farmer on your own. It is a challenge. There's a lot there. There's a lot of science and information, and I'll call them models that you have to run to essentially make sure that everything you're doing as inputs works on the output. So at this point, I'm pretty sure all of them have, but there were some in the beginning of the program that attempted to take it on themselves and have chosen to outsource it.
Other committee members, questions, comments? Senator Wick.
Good. So thank you for the testimony. I'm not on the agricultural committee and I'm not a farmer. So this was a new topic when I read your package. I'm just curious the relationship between A&R and you guys as far as water quality. Are you specializing in farms only or what is the division?
Yeah, well, so there's a lot of documentation and statute and MOU. The Agency of Agriculture regulates under 2 permits that exist, a medium farm permit and a large farm permit. These permits have been created under an MOU with A&R to help make sure that they're at least equal to or greater than what they are required to do, which is called a CAFO permit. So anyways, we regulate these farms, we go out and regulate these farms, and under the MOU, if we find anything that would fall potentially under a CAFO permit, we send it to ANR, and then they have an opportunity to review it and address it based on their regulatory authority.
Senator Bray.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Petro. I had a question about, in the rules you talked about there's a section on greenhouse gas emissions impacts, et cetera. And the state has, under the Global Warming Solutions Act, carbon emissions reduction goals for all sectors of the economy. Are TSPs involved in helping a farm calculate whether or not its operations are helping it come into compliance with the state's goals in terms of reduced emissions for the ag sector?
So respectfully, Senator Bray, I'm not the expert in this space. Mr. Ryan Patch is, but what I can tell you is some of these TSPs are absolutely on the forefront of doing some of the research, the development of innovative tools to do that work. Mainly one I think of is Dr. Heather Darby, which I know a lot of you have met over the years. And so it is not, to be clear, the current structure of what this packet covers is about the nutrients, not the climate change, but obviously that's a question we have to answer in the Lcar packet. And the practices that farmers do to help make sure that they keep really good, healthy soil and absorb carbon is part of that process. And so inherently, the way we answered that question is, of course, by managing your soils and doing all these things appropriately, which all of these tools and models sort of get at, they don't answer that question specifically of greenhouse gas. But there's the byproduct, right, that it does do that.
Okay. Well, it seems like at some point, we'll need a mechanism in place that helps address that. And I just didn't know if, from the agency's perspective, working through TSPs, that's how farms are going to learn practices that help them be in compliance with emissions related laws in the state.
Yeah. The other space too is the NRCS has tools like Comment and other things that they help and work directly with farmers to implement practices. So they have other programs that are already looking at this and supporting this in other ways.
Okay. There's also, you all are part of the conversations ongoing with EPA, between EPA and ANR and Agents of Agriculture about jurisdiction over water quality issues. If there is a change, and there's a corrective action plan due, I think, December 4 of this year, if this program is approved as is the TSP program, is there any connection between the two, or is it? I'm just trying to see if we're setting up in this rule something that's durable, no matter how the EPA ANR conversation goes.
Yeah, so this rule, the TSP rule, allows a certification, professional certification, right? It is separate from the conversation about where regulatory authority for regulating farms is. This is for regulating technical service providers. Not going to project anything into the future, but this rule would allow these folks to get assessed. So if, for instance, someone had a CAFO permit in Vermont, right? And the Agency of Agriculture has this TSP rule, which is in statute and we're supposed to do, right, to make this rule. We can audit nutrient management plans and ensure and give feedback on the quality of that plan to ANR. So there is a feedback loop that we're able to do the program and give them information. They, of course, have the ability to do all of their own independent work, but if ever a concern and they wanted support, we could use this program to support them in that space.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any more questions, comments? Senator McDonald.
For years, I've asked when the Agriculture Department and the agency disagree on the route that should be taken, how is that disagreement resolved?
Are you, want me to?
Yeah, go for it.
Thank you, Senator. Are you referring to ANR and the Agency of Ag?
Yes.
Depends on the issue. When they have authority, they decide. When we have authority, we decide. We also work together, this is an important piece of the narrative. Our water quality division and our water quality folks work together with ANR every week. We have meetings every Friday. We talk to them constantly. The whole narrative about us being unable to cooperate is a narrative, and there have been issues in the past, but we also work together. And also to put that in context, whenever you work with anyone on a complicated issue, these are not simple issues. There are disagreements. And I don't have a problem with having a disagreement with any other state employee. Ultimately, though, we have to have conversations with other state employees. We do it all the time with many agencies, including ANR. We have an ongoing, productive working relationship with them. We do not always agree, but when we don't agree, that's perfectly fine because they have very clear legal authorities to take action when it's a NIPD's issue, a federal CAFO issue, and we have authority to take action when it's not. So I understand the narrative that's out there. It's a little bit, it troubles us mostly because of the work that our folks do, not only the work that our agency does, which we're so proud of in managing water quality, but the work that farmers have done. I mean, farmers are responsible for 90% of the proven phosphorus reductions that have taken place under the TMDL. And it's always they're not doing enough. And we all need to do more. Water quality is essential, but this narrative is a bit off. The Agency of Ag is actually doing a lot. Farms are subject under state law to an umbrella coverage that basically whether they are discharging or not, they have to protect water quality. That is not the reality under federal law. Under federal law, you only have to follow all of the guidelines if you are discharging. In the state of Vermont, we said that's not enough. You all said that's not enough. So whether you are discharging or not, you have to follow the same series of guidelines. The only question is which permit you need. Do you need a permit from ANR or do you need a permit from us? So I understand the narrative is out there that we don't get along. It's not true. We sometimes disagree. We will continue to sometimes disagree. It's actually healthy. People have started to forget that debate is a good thing, that things are not necessarily always straightforward, and having that discussion is how you get to good policy.
Mr. Chair, given that sometimes there's disagreement, my question was, when there is a disagreement, and how is that resolved according to the rules?
So if so ANR has exclusive authority over the federal CAFO and NIPD's program. So if there is a farm that is discharging and requires a federal permit, that's ANR's authority, pure and simple. We can have our opinion about it. Our opinion doesn't matter under the law. If ANR believes that a farm is a CAFO, is discharging and needs a permit, that's their exclusive authority. There's no dispute about that. It's under the law currently. It's the delegation the EPA has given to ANR. It's under state law as well, but if it's a CAFO. If it's not a CAFO, if it's not a discharging CAFO, then we have the authority to regulate that farm, whether it's an LFO, MFO, or a smaller farm. So there is no disagreement about, the question is a CAFO permit required? And that's not nearly as easy of a question to answer as some people believe. So if a farm is discharging and it's a CAFO, it needs a permit.
Mr. Chair, if something is designed okay, it's treated one way. If it's not designed, and if it's not designated to be that, it's treated a different way. Where's the tiebreaker on how it is treated?
Discharge. It is the question is discharge. In terms of how the work is done, we are constantly, and Laura's the expert. This is her world. I'm a visitor. But we have a schedule of, which is again, way exceeds what is required under federal law, but under state law and under our rules, the authority that you all created, we have a regular inspection cycle for farms depending on their size. So when we do that, we have an MOU with ANR. When if we find something that we believe is a discharge, we are required to tell them about it so that they can then look into it. Sometimes we then go out together to evaluate. Sometimes they go on their own. But we have a legal obligation if we see something that we believe is discharged to notify ANR. Does that answer your question, Senator, or not?
No.
Okay, sorry.
There's a disagreement that has not been resolved. How is it resolved? According to the law and according to the rules that we have before us.
So let me just, if there's I'm not sure I understand, but if there's a disagreement, if A&R believes something's a CAFO, our opinion's irrelevant. I mean, if A&R thinks that a farm is a CAFO that's discharging, we can say whatever we want. It doesn't matter. A&R has the legal authority to decide that that farm needs a permit. If that's up to A&R, so disagreement is irrelevant in that scheme of things. We may disagree, sure, reasonable people can disagree, but A&R has the exclusive authority to determine whether or not a discharging CAFO requires a permit.
And
Well, that's a clearer answer than I've been able to get for a couple of decades.
It's that simple. I mean, yeah.
And I just want to clarify, you know, there have been a couple decades that we've been at this table talking about this conversation. And, you know, the ability for the agency to have the resources to do the inspections and get the data over to A&R, it wasn't great back, you know, number of years ago. But everything has changed. And I think if you look at the recent record, I can't think of any disagreements or issues, because the reality of what we've been doing is we don't make the decision about if something is a discharge or not, right? That's clear in the MOU. We send more than we think. We send potentials. We send, you know, likely actuals, right? Not like, but you know, we don't make that decision. So I don't want to call it that, but we send everything plus so that they have more to look at than is likely in the scope. And that was because of the conversations and the concerns of the transparency, bless you, was that we just took a more conservative approach and said, here, look at more, right? So therefore, there is no concern that the Agency of Ag is withholding information that may otherwise be information that should be at A&R. So, and we also work together. We meet every week on Friday to discuss any enforcement cases we have. We meet quarterly with the leadership between the water programs. We meet, I think it's roughly quarterly with the administration, and we also meet quarterly with the Attorney General's office with all of our cases. So there's a lot of already scheduled coordination going on. Our staff do field visits with everybody. We go out with EPA with field visits. So there's a significant amount of coordination, and I can't think of any issues where there are concerns that the decision point is not being made, because as Mr. Collier has laid out, there's a very black and white space there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Senator Bray?
Hearing none, I would move approval of Rule 24, P27, Agency of Agriculture Food Markets Technical Service Provider Certification Rule.
We have a motion to approve Rule 24P27. Any additional discussion? Comments? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's try again for a second one.
Next up, we have 24P28, Agency of Ag, Food and Market Management Practice Rule. It's all yours.
All right. I'll skip introductions if that's okay. Or would you like that formally on the record?
I think you should make her.
Go ahead.
This rule, we call it the BMP rule. We love our acronyms if you haven't figured that out yet, but best management practices. And this word is so tricky because people use it all the time for different things. So I want to be clear from the start. This is about a grant program, right? This is not about a specific practice. It is the name of the overarching grant program in statute. And so these rules have been in place since 1996, and we've been operating a program since then that helps support people to implement practices on their farm. This program is very highly tied to the federal NRCS that I mentioned before. They also offer very similar programs. We rely on their standards for a lot of the practices. But they don't offer a significant portion of cost share all the time. And so the state created this program many years ago to fill a gap. So hypothetically, it doesn't always work out perfectly this way. Each project's different, but hypothetically, the federal money supports 75% of the project. And then the Agency of Agriculture will come in and support the balance between the farmer submitting 10%, right? So that amount that the Agency of Ag puts in can fluctuate if there's less federal money. But it can never go past where the farmer always has to be giving 10%. And we typically don't go below 50%, right? The federal support when we're matching federal has to be at least 50. So we fill that gap somewhere there between 50 and 90%. Construction in progress, right? So this rule was very outdated. It still said Department of Agriculture, Commissioner. It had all the wrong terms. AAPs, which is the old accepted ag practice title of rules. It has now been updated, and that was a reflection of, we had an audit in 2018 and we were told you need to update these. Additionally, you know, a lot of water legislation has changed throughout the years to give directives of these should be your priorities of how you do this work. That was not integrated into the old rule. And so what we have done is just, you know, essentially point to the places in statute to stay current with whatever is asked of us to have as priorities, rather than prescribing it down, and to also somewhat bolster the program to make sure that we have the right ability to be accountable for public dollars. So if people misuse practices, to be very clear upfront in the rule that they're going to be liable for that misuse, which can include repaying the funding that was provided. So we revised it to be up to date to what we've been doing and to meet all of the requirements of the audit and to align with statute.
Ready? Senator McDonald?
Does this rule alter the relationship and authority between agriculture and A&R in any way?
A&R does not have a program that provides any technical support to farmers. So this is that program, and to answer your question in short, this is something that the Agency of Agriculture does. We do not need to coordinate on the granting. What we will, I will say there is coordination if A&R is enforcing on a farm, say for example, and a practice needs to be installed, the practice may be supported through this program. And so our engineers may communicate, or staff may communicate with A&R enforcement to let people know what we do. And so we do have spaces where obviously agreements are being reached, like an assurance of discontinuance or something. We make sure we communicate to ensure that the project timeline makes sense for what's able to be done.
Thank you. Representative Higley?
Oh, no, I was gonna make a motion, but.
Well, wait.
I have a question.
Yes, I do have a question. So again, this is a new program to me. I appreciate all the foundation you provided. It looked like in the package, the grants are roughly 73,000 per farm. Is that 73,000 the combination of the farmer, the feds, and the state, or is that the state's contribution?
That's the state's contribution.
Okay. And how do you mentioned about, you know, potential misuse of grants, but how do we know what they're doing and if they're doing what they said they were going to do to gain the grant?
Sure. We follow up. We go on site and we look at the practices and we document and ensure. That was one thing from the audit that we were questioned of, you know, we do inspections on farms, but we're also doing practice checks as well on farms now.
Okay, so thank you. Is the state involved in that prioritizing which farms get awarded the grant, or is that at the federal level?
Sort of both, right? Because we can do state only, but we do like to use and prioritize using the federal funding because they have a significant amount of funding right now. So we have a matrix that we look through to prioritize, right? So the simple way to explain it, the worse your water quality problem is, the more likely we are to rank you higher. If you're nowhere near water and it's a nice practice, right? It might be good for other reasons. It may not rank as high, right? Because we want to make sure we address the water quality. So.
Good. And again, just for education purposes, can you provide an example of a successful grant that, you know, why it was awarded and what the outcome was?
Yeah, absolutely. As of late, what we've been working a lot more on is there are a lot of farms who are taking the smaller farms that you see in Vermont and rehabbing them and getting into more of a diversified agriculture. And a lot of farms don't want to go to liquid manure storage at that size, right? Because it requires a lot of different trucks and maintenance, and they want to keep it solid so that they can manage it. And so one of the challenges is like an organic farm as an example, right? You need to have the cows outside, but if the cows are outside, we have rain, we're blessed with water. So that manure that might hit the barnyard can run off the barnyard, right? Otherwise it will fill up the barnyard, fill into the barn. You can't have that. And so we've been putting these, if you've seen them, we call them solar barns or hoop structure covers, like the white covers that are over and they're plastic tarp sort of canvas. Those help keep that barnyard protected, but then we've worked with NOFA, and create a porch so that the farms can go outside and get that sunlight that they need, but be able to walk freely around and have a barnyard that has a cover to keep the rain off and keep the manure solid so that they don't have to invest in a significant portion of liquid manure management. And there is a benefit for that solid manure to be able to increase the organic matter in the soil as well.
Okay, thank you. Very helpful. Thanks, sir.
Michael Grady, you have a question?
So I just want to see if the agency wants to make an additional change to the rule based on my late edits to them. I unfortunately thought I had sent edits to them, but I realized at the beginning of the week I did not. And there's one additional edit that they may want to make.
Yes, we do. Thank you, Mike. If we could, Mike, when he was reading it, discovered that in section 3.2, we use agricultural pollution. And it really works better to use agricultural non-point source waste, which is one of the terms that's defined. It's in the vernacular, it was sort of equivalent, but it makes more sense to use the word that's defined. So we would move to make that change if the committee permits it.
James.
The word was struck out and different term was put in. And then this is just correcting the term so it matches up to the defined term.
So it doesn't need to be part of the motion.
You could say with the change proposed by the agency this morning as part of your motion, yeah.
Just getting our motions correct.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion, we approve 24P28, Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets Best Management Practice with the change proposed by the agency.
any questions, comments? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Okay, next up, we have Rule 24P19, Agency Natural Resources, 2024 Materials Management Plan. Not sure who's here. We have three people on the list here. This looks like Josh.
Yeah, indeed. Good morning. I'm Josh Kelly, the Solid Waste Program Manager at the Agency of Natural Resources, Department of Environmental Conservation. Thanks for having me. We're here to talk about a plan which has to go through the rulemaking process. And it is a plan, but it has authority like a rule. So it's a little unique. It is in statute under Title 10, 6604, as the Solid Waste Management Plan. But for about 15 years, we've been calling it the Materials Management Plan, copying language of the EPA, encouraging us to think about our waste as materials that can have another life. So it's a 5-year plan, and I mentioned 15 years because every 5 years we're supposed to pass a new one and introduce a new one. And so the 2024 draft that was submitted to you all is very similar to the 2019 version. And just to explain the major parts, by statute, it's supposed to have a narrative section that explains like the markets for materials and updates for what happens to different waste materials like construction and demolition waste, textiles and clothing, sludge, biosolids, residuals. It's supposed to talk about recyclables. And so we update that every 5 years and explain really to the public what's happening with materials and the General Assembly. The other part is the action section. And for the past 15 years, the plan has been much more action oriented than planning oriented. And it sets in really actions for the agency to take around solid waste management and for our solid waste management entities. Just to give the visual map of solid waste management entities in the state of Vermont, I did bring colored maps. So in case anybody wants to see those, I'll share those around because the map does change over time. So when we talk about solid waste management entities, we're talking about solid waste districts that have they have a legal authority to pass ordinances like municipalities. And then there's towns that are independent, and there's towns that have joined together to really just ally with each other, create an alliance with each other to meet the state's solid waste planning requirements. So the materials management plan really sets in motion what municipalities have to do to be in conformance with this plan. They then have to initiate solid waste implementation plans of their own once this plan is adopted in the rulemaking process. And the greatest cost center historically has been household hazardous waste services. And household hazardous waste is things in your garage, in your basement, generally speaking, the most toxic form of the solid waste stream. It is hazardous waste. It's just exempt for the fact that we as people, residents generate it, not major corporations. So the services to provide that are costly. Actually, this body understands that past first in the nation household hazardous waste producer responsibility, where producers are now obligated to pay some of those municipal costs. It kind of came to a head, so to speak, in 2023. But in short, the 2019 plan and the 2024 plan don't make any changes, any significant changes to household hazardous waste services. We require solid waste management entities to have either a household hazardous waste collection facility or 2 events per year, spring and summer. These are HHW collection events, spring and summer. Some of your residents use these events annually or every 6 months. And then, so again, that's sort of like the major cost center, which drives sort of the municipal budgets and which sort of solid waste district they decide to be part of, or if they want to do it on their own. The plan requires also school outreach by municipalities and business outreach on waste reduction, waste materials, hazards, recycling. We found that education and outreach is critically important so that people understand what to do with stuff, where they can bring it, and how to manage it properly. And that is also very similar to the 2019 plan. Some of the new things, though, to at least mention are the plan requires a more disaster response. We've kind of come through 2 and more than 2 flood and severe storms since the 2019 plan was adopted. You know, the flooding of July 2023 was a major wake-up call for us in the solid waste management realm. And then again, 2024 on the anniversary didn't help. And there's many other storms in between. So in reaction to that, the agency put forth a requirement on ourselves to continue our collaboration with our hazardous waste colleagues when there is a disaster. We collaborated very well. We stood up with the EPA's help, a hazardous material collection site in Middlesex, so that people who had flooded basements could bring their hazardous materials there for no cost. And the EPA was instrumental in helping with that. That was in response to July 2023 flooding. So we hope to start those partnerships up again, working with the SEOC, Vermont Emergency Management, to really manage the 2 things we're getting in Vermont when a disaster happens in terms of the waste. It's hazardous materials and debris. And debris can be trees, it can be soils on a flooded athletic field, and it can be whole houses, sadly, in some situations. And it can be just flooded basements with tons of trash that materials are now trash. We also require the municipalities in this plan to have at least 1 permitted inert debris site. This is usually commonly called stump dumps. Some of you collect leaf and yard debris and you bring it to your stump dump. You might have a project where you dug up a bunch of rocks and you can bring it to your stump dump. It's things like vegetative waste, woody debris, concrete, rocks, brick, sometimes asphalt, inert waste that are allowed to be managed without a full landfill permit. And we call them categorical disposal facilities, but really a lot of people call them stump dump. We're requiring that our municipalities have this, at least one per district or town, for future disaster management. And we're working with Vermont Emergency Management on that process. They've been very supportive and encouraging. It also sets our municipalities up for success with FEMA reimbursement. FEMA looks to the agency for where the waste went that the municipality picked up, and was it to a permitted facility? If you don't have a permitted facility, you're in danger of not getting FEMA reimbursement. They want to see the whole process. So that's one of the changes that we've put in place. Lastly, the other thing to just note, there's been a lot of discussion about disposal capacity. We have one operating landfill in the state. And we are committing to a stakeholder process on disposal capacity of the future through this plan. That we will broadly open it up to other agencies of government as well as municipalities, haulers, and interested groups. I should talk about public engagement strategy just briefly, or what we went through for this plan. We find that getting input early is really helpful for us in the drafting. So in April of 2023, we sent the materials management plan, the 2019 version, because that was our draft we had. Then we sent it out to our municipal governments and said, what are your thoughts on this? What changes would you like to see? We then created a draft with those 9 comments we received, and created the 2024 plan. And we incorporated some new sections like a climate section, an environmental justice section to talk about some of these newer issues that the state's facing. And also let's talk about some of the issues we're facing that have kind of bubbled up, like bears and trash. My secretary sometimes giggles about the weird things we talk about in waste, but they have become a very major issue for people around the state, as well as the wildlife of the state. So we need to highlight that in this plan. We, in February and March of 2024, had a 30-day public comment period, a preliminary public comment period on that draft, that 2024 draft. And we sent it to our solid waste management entities, districts, towns. We sent it to the town clerk's list, all certified solid waste haulers and facilities, Agency of Agriculture, Vermont Emergency Management, our internal DEC departments, wastewater, and then outside groups like Conservation Law Foundation, DUMP, Don't Undermine Memphremagog's Purity, VPIRG, Vermont Retail Grocers Association, people that we know are stakeholders very interested in our work. We sought their input. And then we got about 15 comments on that plan, and then incorporated some of those changes into the ICAR submittal, went through the ICAR process. And ICAR encouraged us to share it with the Department of Health. We hadn't taken that step. We talk about toxics a bit in the plan, and they wanted to make sure the Department of Health got to comment. Yeah, I think I will. After the comment period, I just wanted to mention that we did receive 8 public comments. So this is the official public comment period that we went through. This is our second. We had a preliminary and an official one. We had 8 public comments, some from our solid waste management entities, some from some towns. DUMP commented, and the American Chemistry Council commented, partially in response to that household hazardous waste producer responsibility law. They were taking an opportunity to speak their mind on several things that weren't really germane to the plan itself, but nonetheless, they submitted comments. In general, the changes we've made in response to comments have been pretty minor. So, just to be fully transparent, some of the comments from DUMP were to change statute, and we don't do that. We cannot do that. To totally revamp the way the plan process works. They wanted statute to be revisited. And we simply said that's the purview of the General Assembly. The other things were fairly minor. We softened some of the school outreach requirements. We have some schools that haven't responded to a municipal person trying to reach out to explain what's required in recycling. Can we do education? And if they don't respond, we sort of check the box, they've tried. They're supposed to do in-person outreach to the schools because we find that's best for the administration and the student body. So we softened that requirement that if they make a concerted effort, we'll check the box that they did it. And then with business outreach, we require a minimum of 20 outreach contacts per year. We lowered that to 15 per year.
Question for you. Just going back to your comment relative to DUMP. And they were suggesting that somehow there should be some statutory changes in the way you put your plan together and things like that. So my question to you and the agency is, do you find that argument credible? I know you can't do that, but do you think the legislature should make those changes?
I think that's going to be a lot of the conversation we're going to have in the disposal capacity of the future. There's a lot of federal laws that preempt our abilities to prevent out of state. They were concerned that there's a lot of out of state waste coming into the state and being disposed of here, and that the fact that we didn't have municipally run landfills regionally located around the state, this map is sort of part of that history. The idea was that each region would have sort of its own landfill. It did not form for a multitude of reasons. Economics and economies of scale, which you hear about all the time in the context of Vermont, are one of the major factors. You cite a landfill. There are landfills that are permitted and ready to be built and designed and opened. They wouldn't operate for very long. They may not get any waste if the private sector outcompetes that waste. Vertical integration is the name of the game. You own the customers, you've got the trucks, and you have the disposal facility. And if you have that, it's very difficult to compete. So I think the short answer is a lot of this discussion is going to be in that stakeholder process that we've committed to as part of this plan.
Okay. Representative Higley.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I have a question regarding, it sounds like there's a 2024 plan that's required for all the solid waste management entities for a disaster debris management plan.
Yes.
I guess my concern, and of course, one of my towns is Coventry.
Yeah.
But what's to say that, and again, I know, in disasters, there's time elements, there's personal folks that contribute their time to help clean up. So I guess the question is, what safeguards are there that there's not a lot of hazardous waste debris that gets put into a regular dumpster that gets just run into the landfill?
Right. There's a couple of things. We have facility permits with the transfer stations that accept most of the waste in the state of Vermont, and most of the waste, about 85%, gets disposed of in Coventry at the landfill. Those permits do not allow them to accept hazardous waste, hazardous materials. But when a truck is tipping, it's very hard to see that material in there. That's actually why we've required a much higher standard than many other states, that's household hazardous waste services for 30 plus years. We're way ahead in that. I think that's also why, with the high cost of that, we've got producers to share some responsibility in that cost. Specific to disasters, we've sort of committed to, if another disaster comes, explore with our other sister agencies, partnerships that can stand up the hazardous materials collection sites. And this is for business waste too. We have had hardware stores get flooded, and all those products that you and I all buy suddenly are waste, hazardous waste, because the store produced it. If I take the motor oil and bring it in, it's household hazardous waste, but now they're regulated. So if a flood hits a hardware store or an automotive parts store, it's a lot of high hazard material that can suddenly become a waste. And the bottom line is that the plan we hope to require municipalities to fill out is very short. We're working on it with Vermont Emergency Management. It's like one page. And it's saying, and it's really specific actually to trash and construction and demolition debris. With regard to hazardous materials, we're asking them to identify locations where they could emergency stockpile hazardous materials or household hazardous materials. It's mostly paint, by the way. By weight, it is almost 60% in some cases paint. You have a basement right now, and you have a garage, you have a shed. You look in there and you start weighing the stuff. It's mostly paint that you can recycle that in Vermont at over about 100 locations for no cost. We want to encourage people to do that before they're in a disaster scenario. But I would describe the requirements as fairly simple. Just identify a location where in an emergency, you can stage this material so that we can go pick it up so we can help, so we can be faster. If they have that in the plan, then we know where we're going. Should Coventry have the next windblown, whatever, or a snowstorm that floods and creates waste, that's what it's for. The trash and construction debris, It's simply, there's statute that says municipalities are responsible for solid waste. They are responsible for waste in the roadway. People were told to put stuff out on the roadway and then the towns were going to get it. Many towns don't have the capacity to do that. So we're asking them to say, do they want to do it in this plan? Or do they want to, the state has a standing contractor for emergencies. You might have seen during the 2023 flood on roads in central Vermont and in southern Vermont, there was these, what they call log trucks with a grapple. And they were picking up waste from the roadside and filling the truck. That is a contractor from out of state. It's held jointly, BGS holds the contract. We advise on the contract with BGS, Vermont Emergency Management, and the agency. And they deploy those resources to help people when disaster strikes. If we know the town wants that help through the plan, they've identified it, then we can get those resources to people much faster.
And just a quick follow-up, you mentioned stump dumps.
Yeah.
Are those all, they all have to be permitted, correct?
Correct.
Okay, yep.
Yeah, we want them to exist even if they're not in high use. So, because you never know, it's almost like carpet bombing with some of these storms. Hail event here, wind blown event there. It's just, you do not know which town is going to get hit. We recommend every town have a stump dump, to be honest, because most of this debris is fairly inert. It's just trees in the roadway, but it's inhibiting commerce, kids getting to school, people getting to work. It needs to go somewhere. And if we can get some of these places, it does not usually need to be landfilled at a high cost. The closer it is, the easier it is to manage.
Thank you.
Senator Weeks.
Thanks, Chair. So I was kind of taken by the American Chemistry Council's feedback in their discussion of circular waste economy. Okay, I get it. But I'm curious, you mentioned in your testimony the disposal capacity of the future. Is that a report that's coming out to the legislature?
I think we will definitely have a report coming out with that. This is basically not mandated on us that we do this, but we're doing it proactively. There's been a lot of discussion in General Assembly about, we have one landfill, what are we going to do? It has limited capacity. It has anywhere from 18 years or less, depending on fill rates. Yeah.
And roughly when is that expected?
We don't have a time set in the 5-year plan, but we intend to start right in 2025. So we don't know how long it will take. So putting dates on yourself that you can't meet sometimes doesn't feel great in state government. And it's a 5-year plan, so it really needs to be a little flexible with what we've learned. Even setting dates on some of our municipalities can sometimes be challenging. So we intend to start that up in 2025.
Okay, but the concept of a circular waste economy is not part of that disposal vision of the future.
I guess not really, because we've been so aggressive compared to other states with the circular waste economy. Or some of our landfill bans, universal recycling law banning food waste, banning recyclables, requiring haulers to collect recycling. I was just in New York State for a conference just yesterday, and there is not dumpsters for recycling in most places. We have that. You drive around the state of Vermont, it's pretty ubiquitous. And we have some work to do with circular economy, such that paper is coming back with more recycled content, or I was just on a panel yesterday about toothpaste tubes, which are not recyclable now, that Colgate is working very hard to make them something you put in the recycling bin in the future. And I believe that will be successful. So it's coming from in and out of state right now in laws that are in place in other states. The American Chemistry Council has been at the seat at the table in many of these discussions. The state of Vermont had discussions about laws with members of Ameripen and ACC in the past. So they're certainly leaning into the challenge as well, I would say. I'd say industry is actually being quite cooperative in many cases. There's more work to be done. And there's a lot of challenging waste that are just not circular because of really good reasons. Some containers have hazardous materials in them and you don't want to recycle them because there's still a residue of hazardous material. But there's many rooms for opportunity there. We could go into a lot of detail, but I'll try and keep it simple.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Senator McDonald.
So, the process that you've described for dealing with things such as sand and gravel and brick and asphalt and paving stones, wood chips and sludge and trash and household waste. At exit 6 between the north and the southbound lane, what a small valley between those two, which in the last 2 years of flooding has been being filled with trucks coming up from Barry and those places. Has that waste gone through the process that you described, or has it been waived for emergencies and it's just going there?
It's going there through an existing exemption in our solid waste rules. V-Trans is pulling, they have culverts all over the place on town roads that all the sediment and debris backs up to, and then it just punches out the road. I mean, in short. And so if it hasn't punched out the road, then they're unclogging that culvert and they're bringing that soil and rock and a few tree limbs to those sites. And there is an exemption if it's from the right of way that the state manages and brings it to another property they manage, they can dispose of inert waste in that way. And so we're aware of it. And V-Trans has been working very closely with Vermont Emergency Management on the last several disasters. They have 2 vehicles. They call them the Bronny and the Bounty. I think it's a paper towel reference. I'm not sure. But they have a claw truck. It's a claw truck with a container body so that they can help towns in these emergencies before the next rain event hits.
There's another smaller one down in Brookfield about.
Yep, I've seen them as well driving. Yep, driving.
Those going home to Rutland tonight can take a look when they get up to the top of the hill to the South Barry exit where the radar trap is usually.
Yeah, and as you can see, it's a lot of
do radar surveillance.
right. You can see it's a lot of soil. I think they even put grass seed down, and they have erosion control measures as well. But it's literally just a lot of soil that gets moved from these rain events, and they're picking that up and depositing it there so that the culvert doesn't flood again.
Well, it's soil on top and it's other stuff underneath the top.
Yeah, I've seen gravel mostly or rocks. There may be some concrete in there, but I haven't seen much more than that. So,
Senator Bray.
Thank you. So thank you for bringing forward the rule. In the process of preparing it, does that suggest to you that you can see another revision of the rule coming, or that you have things that you, as a result of writing the rule, would want to bring to the legislature this coming session?
We're due, Senator Bray, for a biennial report on solid waste as well, in the same statute that explains that we have this obligation to put this 5-year plan out. We're also every 2 years required to update you on solid waste. So I think that will be our platform, probably pulling a lot from what's in the plan of explaining what the challenges are in waste and where we're headed. I expect we'll reference the disposal capacity of the future stakeholder process. We have a lot of interest in that already. And I think it's a little premature to say anything more than that, because I feel like we owe it to stakeholders to give them the fair shake to learn about our challenges and our opportunities with waste disposal, which is only one issue, but we still have, honestly, the bear and trash issue is one we will be talking about. It still comes up. And I expect we're in the process of implementing a lot of things that this body has really given to us. When we said what the challenges are, you have responded. We have rechargeable battery producer responsibility. It means in the future, your kid's scooter that's electronic has a very powerful battery in it and can start fires and has burned trash trucks in other states to the ground on the highway, will be recyclable and safely collected for free in the state of Vermont. We are building that in 2026. We have household hazardous waste EPR, producer responsibility. You helped us get that passed. We're in the implementation phase. So we have a lot of work to do right now, honestly, to deliver on what you have put forth. But I think it will result in some really great services in the future.
Great. And the other thing is biosolids. So there are biosolids in the rule, biosolids is an issue. Where are we on that in terms of, are you satisfied with the rule as is and we're sort of all done? Or is that a topic of active discussion for the state of Vermont because of the land application and the contamination that can go with land application of biosolids?
Yeah, it is absolutely, well, first of all, it's not in my purview per se. Eamon Tuig is the program manager for the residuals or biosolids program. It is part of our solid waste rules, which is separate from the state materials management plan. that is where I believe the action might be taken if the rules are opened up to explore what the allowable uses are for biosolids in the state of Vermont, in light of the contamination concerns that we're learning more and more about with PFAS in biosolids. Sadly, kind of come from our clothes anyway. It's an inconvenient truth. So I think that's the appropriate place for action, and I would defer to Matt Chapman, my division director, and Eamon on their thoughts there. But I know they are talking about it actively, and Matt Chapman is one of the leaders in PFAS contamination and action steps in not only in the Northeast, but I think in the country right now.
Great. Well, thanks. Well, I always have questions, but I also want to share my appreciation for the close work that the Natural Resources Committee has done with the agency session after session on addressing yet another piece of this complicated puzzle of managing all these materials. And with that, I would like to move approval of Rule 24P19, Agents of Natural Resources 2024 Materials Management Plan.
Okay, we have a motion to approve Rule 24P19. Any additional discussion or comments? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next up, we have Rule 24P22, Department of Labor, Vermont Workers' Compensation and Occupational Disease Rules, 1 through 27.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Dirk Anderson. I'm the Director of Workers' Compensation and Safety for the Vermont Department of Labor. And I'm joined virtually by quite a few people, actually. Our General Counsel, Robert Depper, our Administrative Law Judges, Stephen Brown and Beth DiBernardi, and our Workers' Comp Program Manager, Barry and Ina Van Fleet. I'm going to just describe why we're here, how this rule came about, and Beth did the bulk of the work on it, so I will let her answer any specific questions. But back in 2023, some advocates for workers' comp claimants came to the legislature with some proposed legislative tweaks. We worked with them, we worked with the insurance industry, come up with a series of statutory changes that were generally agreeable to everybody. And they found their way into H217 or Act 76 back in 2023. And Damien drafted it. And that legislation required us to amend our workers' compensation rules to account for the statutory changes. And in the course of doing that, we tweaked a couple of other things that we found when we were going through the rules, but by and large, this rule is merely a reflection of the statutory changes that were made in 2023. We did receive some public comment on the rule, which I think best summarized very well. And you have that in your packet, as well as how we addressed that. And here we are. And I think if there are any specific questions as to the content of the rule and or public comment on our response to it, I would let Beth address that.
I just have a note I made and trying to remember why I made this note. Repealing a provision that was not in statute relative to maybe some payments. You know what I'm referring to?
You might be referring to the indemnity payments that we adopted by rule for volunteer firefighters. The way the statute works in workers' comp is if you're injured on the job, you get certain benefits that apply to you. In particular, you get medical benefits for reasonable treatment for your work injury, and everybody gets that. If you missed work and therefore are losing wages, you also get wage replacement benefits. Now with firefighters, some of them are paid employees, and if they are injured on the job and they miss work, they would get wage replacement benefits because they're not working as a firefighter and they're not getting paid as they normally would have. But for volunteer firefighters, they're not losing any income because they were volunteer firefighters and they didn't have any wages to replace. And the legislative statute pretty clearly explains how this works in terms of volunteer firefighters, and that they get medical benefits and other benefits, but they don't get wage replacement because there are no wages to replace. When the department did a big overhaul of the rules in 2015, somebody added to the rules a wage replacement benefits for volunteer firefighters and said the amount, since there's no wages to replace, the amount will be based on a similarly situated paid firefighter. So that rule was adopted in 2015, but it became apparent pretty quickly within the department that our doing so exceeded the scope of the statute. It flew in the face of the statute, and we were not authorized to do that. So my understanding, going back to even the previous director, Stephen Monahan, is our specialists were instructed not to enforce that rule because it was not within the scope of our legislative authority. And in this rule change, we propose to just delete it. If the legislature thinks there should be wage replacement benefits for volunteer firefighters, I think they would need to have a statutory change. And then we could reenact a rule for that. But I think the rule we have right now is not supported by the statute. And that's why we're looking to repeal it.
Thank you. And Damien?
Just want to add one clarification to what Beth just said, is that volunteer firefighters who do have another job, the statute does provide for wage replacement for the wages lost in that job. And I think Beth just forgot to add that caveat in as she was going through. So if you're a volunteer firefighter and you don't have outside work, so you're not missing any kind of work, this is taking away that wage replacement that you wouldn't have otherwise been entitled to for any other volunteer work. But if you do have an outside job, so you're a full-time, whatever it is, teacher or something else, and you can't go to work because of your injury, you'll still get wage replacement based on your wages from that job. So that's just an important clarification.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Committee, questions, comments? I have a motion then. Senator Bright.
I would move approval of 24 P 22 Department of Labor Workers' Compensation and Occupation Disease Rules 127 with the proposed modifications submitted by the department in the memorandum dated October 25, 2024.
We have a motion from Senator Bray to approve Rule 24P22. Any questions or comments? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next on the agenda are two memos, committees of jurisdiction around a couple of issues. I'm going to turn this conversation over to Ledge Counsel Damien.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So would it help the committee if I pulled the memos up on the screen, or do you want to look at the sheet in front of you? These are memos on the two emergency rules that we considered at our last meeting, the emergency notaries rule and the emergency housing assistance rule.
So we have the sheets, but
Yeah, we have.
can I recommend if there's any viewer?
That's fine.
Is it up online?
It should be. Are these
One way or the other,
Mike?
as long as they have a.
But I can share them very easily. So
I have mine.
Senator Bray, when we go into this mode, sometimes I won't see your hand up, so feel free to speak up.
Okay, I'll sing out if I need to. Thank you.
Okay.
See them online.
okay, I'll resend them to you, Mike, so they can be posted. So I started with EO7. Let me start with EO6. Apologize for that. The screen for choosing your sharing is small enough that I'm having trouble reading it. EO6 was the general assistance, emergency housing assistance, emergency rules. As you'll remember at the last meeting, the committee voted to neither approve nor object to the rule. So I've wrote, and I've based this on memos you've sent in the past. The vote was based in part on oral testimony from Heidi Moreau and Nicole Toussaint from the department, oral and written testimony from Leah Burdick, the staff attorney at the Elder Law Unit, Vermont Legal Aid, and oral testimony from Brenda Siegel, the executive director of End Homelessness Vermont. And then I go on to, or the memo goes on, and I should note this is a draft memorandum, so it's up to the committee to actually approve the language I've drafted for them or to make amendments now. To describe what the rule does, and noting that it was required by Act 113. And then on page 2, we go on to note, the memo goes on to note that testimony presented regarding the impact of subdivision 2652.2 G16 of the emergency rule provides that to be eligible for assistance, a household must have exhausted all available resources. Under the prior rules, this requirement only applied to households served under temporary housing in catastrophic situations pursuant to the former section 2633.2, and not to households served under temporary housing for vulnerable populations pursuant to the former section 2652.3. So as required by the Act, those two categories were eliminated, and DCF made the decision to require the resource exhaustion. So I've stated here that Lcar is particularly concerned that requiring a household to spend down its resources can prevent that household from saving sufficient funds to transition into newer permanent housing, and that requiring a household served under temporary housing for vulnerable populations to exhaust their resources to qualify for emergency housing assistance is confusing to both applicants and participants, and denies housing assistance to those households in a manner that may be contrary to the intent of the General Assembly. And gone on to note that this issue is not specifically contemplated in legislative negotiations. And because of that, Lcar believes that it is potentially contrary to the intent of the General Assembly. However, Lcar is choosing not to object on that ground, and that this should not be considered an implied legislative authorization of the rule's substantive or procedural lawfulness. And then finally, the memo includes a final paragraph that notes that Lcar appreciates that the department has provided a guidance document to its staff for how to determine eligibility for emergency housing assistance that permits staff to disregard funds that are being saved for necessary expense. But Lcar is concerned that the information is not being effectively communicated to households seeking that assistance. And because of that, Lcar encourages the department to provide additional information and clarity to applicants and participants regarding the resource exhaustion and the ability to set aside resources. So my colleague Katie McClin and I went back over the last hearing, and we tried to capture and paraphrase the discussion. But certainly, I'm absolutely open to corrections or comments or edits if this doesn't accurately capture the discussion, or if you'd like to phrase things differently.
Thank you for that. Committee questions or comments? Certainly Senator Lyons, who's not here today, is probably most versed in this issue.
I really appreciate this. I think it's really nicely written. I can't think of anything that leaves out.
Senator Weeks?
Just curious, I agree with Representative Lee. In the final paragraph, it said in the final sentence, it says Lcar encourages. Is there a word that can be a little more toothy, a little more aggressive and coercive? Anything getting and actually having to do this?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way would be to say strongly or emphatically or you could say implores. That sounds a little bit like you're begging.
Yeah.
You can't require.
You can't require. And you could say expects. Didn't want to put those words in there without. I know in last year's memo, there were more discussions about changes that Lcar expected to see in the next round. And so there was language that said it is Lcar's expectation. I don't know if that's appropriate here or not, based on what I saw in the testimony. But certainly the words are the committee's. So whether you agree with my paraphrasing of the testimony or not, you can say it is Lcar's expectation, or you could say it strongly encourages, you know, and you know, or would appreciate, you know, follow up from the agency on how it has accomplished that when it submits the permanent rules. Because you are expecting permanent rules on this around the new year. So in the next couple of months, you should be seeing permanent rules, and that would be an opportunity for Lcar to follow up.
I like to use the word of expectation.
Okay.
And is it not correct? I mean, we could not use the word direct because that direction only can take in the form of statutory language. Is that correct?
Be consistent.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have as a committee, you don't have the legislative authority to direct an agency to do something. So you couldn't direct. But you could say it is Lcar's expectation. That, for example, we could change the last sentence to say, because of that, it is Lcar's expectation that the department will take steps to ensure that additional information and clarity is provided to applicants and participants.
So seeks clarification.
So I can pull that up, show you.
And how about, and would appreciate that in the final rule? Is that what you also suggested?
And I was suggesting that would appreciate the agency providing an update regarding the assistance that it's or how it has provided that information and clarity when it submits its final rule to Lcar.
Right.
Okay, because of that.
Any other comments, questions? Good stuff.
The only other comment I have is thank you. To listen to a group of legislators talk and then turn it into a letter is a feat unto itself.
Really nice.
All right. With the changes that Daniel is making, do I have a motion?
I can't see. Mr. Chair, I would move that we approve the letter with the edits currently as described and currently being made in front of us.
As we speak.
As we speak, yeah.
Okay.
Live edit.
Yeah, can we wait till the sentence?
I suppose we should let him finish typing. Right.
As we're just watching the magic happen.
Yeah.
Sausage production.
That's emergency housing. Sorry. Scrolling for anyone who's looking at this on a screen.
Just a process question before we vote. Will the final rule roll back through Lcar? Or will it go only to the
Final rule comes back.
Yeah, so this is an emergency rule.
Oh,
You've voted to neither approve nor deny. It's already in effect. They're working on a permanent rule. That has to come back through Lcar as part of the APA process. So
Okay.
when that comes in, that's what I'm referring to when I say the it's permanent rule.
gotcha.
Okay, you ready for a vote? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Mike, I will send that to you after we complete discussion of the next piece. So the other memo is much simpler. So this is on 24-E07, emergency administrative rules for notaries public, electronic and remote notarization. It's the same lead-in language, noting that the vote is 7-1 to neither approve nor object to the rule. And then Lcar based this vote on testimony from Emily Tretto, the staff attorney at the Office of Professional Regulations, and written testimony from Sean Brown, the chair of Lcar. And then the memo goes on to note that in 24-E07, OPR is extending until February 26th of next year. The existing emergency administrative rules for notaries public and electronic and remote notarization, which were first adopted all the way back in March 2020. In 2022, the General Assembly authorized permanent rules regarding remote and electronic notarization. And the OPR filed its proposed permanent administrative rules on September 18th of this year. And then I go on to cite the law for emergency rules, which is that they can be adopted when there is an imminent peril to public health, safety, or welfare. And since the COVID-19 pandemic has ended, that peril, such an imminent peril necessary to justify these rules has not existed. Lcar is deeply concerned about the use of emergency rulemaking without specific prior authorization from the General Assembly when no such imminent threat exists. In addition, while it recognizes that OPR has limited resources and has experienced staffing challenges, Lcar is concerned that it took more than 2 years to file proposed permanent rules regarding electronic and remote notarial acts after it had received legislative authorization to do so. Because there is no imminent peril that supports the adoption of the emergency administrative rules, Lcar believes that the rule does not meet the requirements of the statute. However, Lcar is choosing not to object on this ground, but its decision not to object should not be considered implied authorization.
Comments, questions?
That captures what we talked about.
I think it does. Yeah.
Okay.
Hearing no questions, motion. Senator Bray?
Right on cue. I would move approval of the rule as just reviewed by the committee and presented by Mr. Leonard.
Comment? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, David.
Great, you're welcome.
Thanks, everybody. Turn it back to you.
Next meeting?
Do you know, you don't know what our calendar is?
I have it here.
You have it?
So you
We
have
only had one rule, right?
You have one rule that is up for the next meeting on November 21st. So the November 7th meeting, there are no rules, so no need to meet. And then November 21st, there's one rule that rule's 45-day period ends on December 8th. Then you tentatively have another meeting for December 5th. So I think it's really up to the committee whether you want to come in for that on the 21st.
If I may, I would say let's postpone till December 5th.
I agree.
We're all good with that?
I won't be here.
All right, and that's what we'll do, December 5th, 's the next meeting. And thank you, everyone. We're adjourned.